Okay, so now I'm going to show you how to sew a waistband onto a garment. In this case, this little makeshift skirt here. Okay, you'll notice here's the waistband pattern. You'll see that on one side of it, I have these notches, all right, these directional notches. They actually line up with what would be the front dart or the back darts or princess seams, okay, but they are not on the other side. They're just on one side of the waistband, okay. That's because this is the side that will sew to the skirt first, okay. This is a self-facing waistband, so along this broken line here, this folds, okay, making it so that this side would be the facing and against the body, okay? Also notice that it has an underlap on one side and then nothing on the other. It just ends at center back. And that's those are the major details of this one. So let's go ahead and stitch it together or start preparing it. So I've interfaced one side of my waistband, okay? And then on the other side, just so you can see, I've marked the notches. All right, so the first thing we're going to go do is we're going to go ahead and stay stitch the side of the waistband that does not have our directional notches on it. Okay, so let's go ahead and stay stitch that at a 1/2 inch, the same as the pattern. All right, again, we're stay stitching the side that does not have those extra notches on it, and we'll stay stitch it at the seam allowance, so that's a 1/2 inch. Quickly do that. There we go. We'll go back to the ironing board. Okay, so we have the ironing board now. What we're going to do is we're going to press this waistband in half the long ways, bringing both edges to meet, like so. Make sure you press it exactly in half. So there it is, pressed in half. Now on the stay stitching side, we're going to open this up. And the reason we stay stitch this is to give us a nice line to turn this up. Okay, so we're going to turn that stay stitching. We're going to turn the seam allowance up into the waistband right where we stay stitched it. And give that a good press. There we go. If I flip this over, you can see now that this side of the waistband has been turned up. The seam allowance has been turned up, and it's giving that nice clean finish. Okay, so let's move this out of the way. And we're going to take our skirt, we'll unzip the zipper, and now we can start attaching or pinning on our waistband to the skirt. The first thing we want to do is find our center front notch, which is right here. And we're going to find our center front notch on our waistband, which is right here. Okay, so what we're going to do is find the center front notch on our waistband, which is right here. And there's a center front notch on our skirt. And we're going to put right sides together, lining those up. And pin that right together, okay? And remember, we're only catching this one side of the lining, okay? Or sorry, of the waistband, okay? The other side we're letting hang free right now. And then we go out to our next notch, which is right here, and that should line up with our dart. Pin that. Moving on out, line up the next notch. Okay, and that will should line up with our side seam. And it does, so let's go ahead and pin that. Next we come to our back princess, or our back dart rather. And we'll put a pin in there. And then if everything's done correctly, our back notch, which is right here, should line up right with the back of our garment. Okay? Center back, and it does. So line that up and put a pin in. Alright, so let's go the other way and do the same thing. Lining up our notches with the coordinating seam or dart on the skirt. So that's front dart. Here's our side seam. And then our back dart. And then center back. Okay, this is the side with the overlap. So again, you have this 1.5 inch extra, okay, plus seam allowance. All right, so don't get that confused. Don't think that you have too much here. Okay, so this inside notch here lines up with the back of the skirt, like so. Okay. There it is, all pinned on. Now we can go to the machine and stitch this on. Alright, we're back at the machine. Let's go ahead and stitch this on at 1/2 inch. Be careful when you're stitching that if you have darts pressed towards the center or something, that they don't get flipped back as you stitch. You can put a pin through them to hold them in place if you need to. Okay, we're going to stitch this on at 1/2 inch, back tack beginning and end. Here we go. There we are. Okay, so now it's been stitched on. Let's go back to the table. Go on to the next step. Okay, so we're back. What we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and we're going to press. Let's get this all up the side here. So what we're going to do now is we're going to press the seam allowance up into the waistband because this other side of the waistband is going to come down over it and clean finish it. Okay? Because you sewed a straight edge to a round edge, just so it lays a little better, we're going to simply clip about every inch or so through all layers right down to our stitching line, but not through it, to give it a nice clean. This makes it so that the seam allowance can kind of bend, the straight seam allowance of the waistband can kind of bend, or curve rather, with the skirt, and they won't be fighting each other. We're just kind of freeing it up to do that, like so. There we go. Okay, let's go ahead and press it up. Because this is curved, I'm going to use my ham. And we'll just press this right up like so. Should go pretty quickly. Make sure you're pulling the waistband away from the body of the garment, just so we don't get any puckers or pleats or anything, folds or creases pressed into there. Alright, so now what we need to do is we need to finish the edges of our waistband. The way we're going to do this is we're going to fold right sides together. Okay, actually before we do that, this part right here on our underlap, we have this little bit of seam allowance here. We're going to press that up at 1/2 inch into the waistband first, like so. Okay, then we're going to actually fold our waistband back on itself, so bringing right sides together, like so, and pin it together. Okay, go to the other side of the waistband and do the same thing. All right, fold right sides together. And pin it. Okay, and make sure that the seam allowance of the waistband is pressed up into the waistband. Let's go back to the sewing machine now. Okay. Okay, so now we're going to sew this at a 1/2 inch. Okay. Back tack beginning and end. There we go. Clip your threads. And then I'm going to trim this seam allowance back to 1/4. And then here at the corner, I'm just going to clip up to reduce some of that bulk. Okay? Because now what we'll do is we'll flip that corner to the inside. And push it out. Giving us a nice clean finish. Okay? Let's go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. Right here. Okay, so now, depending on how things worked out, you may or may not have a full 1/2 inch here to sew, and that's okay. The thing you want to be careful of here is we want this to line up with the zipper. So we don't want to stitch right against the zipper. We want to come out about 1/8 of an inch and stitch like that. Okay, so you can draw a line that's about 1/8 of an inch out that comes up. I'm just going to eye it, and I'm going to back tack at the beginning and end. There we go. Trim that back to 1/4, and clip at the corner. Okay, fold that in, like so. Push that corner out nice and clean, gently, so you don't pop it. There we are. And there we go. Get a nice clean finish there. All right. Okay, so the last thing we have to do is stitch down this side, the back side of the waistband, the facing side of it. So what we're going to do is just bring it down, and then here's my stitching right here. Okay, there's my stitching. Bring it down over that, just so it's right over that. If everything worked out perfectly. What you don't want to do is pull it. Okay, it should lay down right over your stitching, and we'll just put some pins in here. Let's turn this like this. Okay, make sure that the seam allowance of the skirt is going up inside that waistband. And you're just going to do this all the way across until you get to the other end. There we go. Okay, so it's been pinned on. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and stitch in the ditch. Meaning we're going to stitch, you can do it a couple different ways. You can stitch right in between where the waistband is attached to the skirt and that seam, and that kind of hides your stitches. And hopefully if everything lines up, you'll catch in here. You'll catch the other side on here. Okay. You can also do a hidden slip stitch, just catching the edge of the waistband to where the seam allowance is. You don't want to stitch, when you do the hidden slip stitch, you don't want to catch the garment. You want to catch the seam allowance up here. Okay, so you hide all your stitches. Or you can stitch right on the edge of the waistband, and that will catch through all layers and catch the other side of the waistband, tacking it down. Okay? So stitching a ditch can be very difficult to get to line up and catch everything correctly. So you can decide what you want to do. So let's go ahead and stitch this on. I'm going to attempt to stitch in the ditch It may not be perfect, but here we go. If you're stitching a ditch, make sure you're pulling the waistband away from the body of the garment, and you're pulling the body of the garment away from the waistband, so you kind of open up that seam and bury those stitches right in there. One other thing about stitching a ditch, you'd typically be using thread that matches your garment, so they are harder to see as well. In this case, I'm using black thread on a muslin, so it's pretty obvious where the stitching is. Really, the hardest part about stitching a ditch is lining up the back of the garment so that it's caught by those stitches, the back of the waistband. That's the hardest part. Okay, we're coming towards the end. Here, you can hand tack this part closed, this underlap, or you can just stitch the bottom of it through all layers. That's what I'm going to do on this demo. So I'll just stitch to the very bottom, catching both layers, and back tack at the end. There we go. Alright, so there it is. The waistband's now been stitched on. Here's the inside. Okay, and you can see here's my stitching. That's where I stitched in the ditch. I stitched in the ditch on this side. If I pull apart, you can see the stitching. And then here you can see where the stitching caught the other end of the waistband. Okay, so that's the waistband complete. Zip it up, and then you have that underlap, which goes underneath like so. And what you would do is you put a hook on this side and an eye right there, because that could hook in right on, completing the waistband. Okay, so there is the waistband attached and complete.